The transfer portal has calmed down for now. I'm going to pair up the top duos of incoming transfers on every Big Ten team. The future at the quarterback position is awfully bright in Ann Arbor, Michigan and Los Angeles, California, but is that future now with Husan Longstreet and Bryce Underwood for the Wolverines and Trojans, respectively? Matt Rhule saying maybe thanks but no thanks to a spring game, a traditional spring game this season. Is that going to become a trend in the Big Ten and all of college football? We're going to cover it all on Big Nation.
From Pasadena to Piscataway, College Park to the Coliseum, Seattle to State College, Columbus to Camp Randall, the Zoo to the Rock, and everywhere in between. This is where Big Ten fans gather to talk America's premier national conference with your host, Big Ten Ted. All Big Ten, all year long. This is Big Nation.
Happy Wednesday, everybody. It's transfers and true freshmen. That's right, we are talking ball here today. But before we get into that, I got to cover a few bullet points to be able to create the bridge into our very first topic that I want to talk about here today. First bullet point that I want to make sure that I get out there: Rashad Samples, the running backs coach at Oregon, giving the cold shoulder to Jerry Jones and the Dallas Cowboys. He interviewed for the running backs coach position in Dallas, but he says, yeah, that grass at Oregon, yeah, it's damn green in Eugene. Moving from the beautiful Pacific Northwest to Texas? Why would anybody do that? That's maybe what Rashad Samples is saying to everybody certainly right now. And that is a big key for Oregon as they're looking to have yet another 1,000-yard rusher, maybe with Mekhi Hughes this season. We'll talk about him a little bit later on during this program. But Rashad Samples also a great recruiter, and he's really helped out in that effort for the Oregon Ducks, certainly as well. So they're happy that he's remaining in Eugene. Let's talk a little bit recruiting. It is the beginning of the late signing period, I guess if you want to call it that here. So we got to talk about this. Now, a lot of everybody's 96, 97, 98% of guys, whatever it is, are signing in the early signing period in December, but there still was a chess piece on the board. There still was a diamond out in the rough, so to speak. Five-star offensive tackle Ty Haywood committed and will sign with the Michigan Wolverines. So you got a guy we're going to be talking about a little bit later in this program by the name of Bryce Underwood. He says, okay, I'll take that cool cash. Thank you to everybody for putting this all together and bringing me here to Michigan. I'm staying home in Michigan. That's great. But what are we building around me? What are we bringing in to kind of really take this thing to the next level? Sharon Moore says, all right, I hear you, Bryce. We're not going to bring in just one great five-star offensive tackle. We're going to bring in two. Alongside Ty Haywood, of course, signing during the early signing period was Andrew Babaloa, a five-star offensive tackle out of the state of Kansas. So they are going to have bookends to be able to protect both sides of Bryce Underwood in the future. You got to love that. Bryce has got to be smiling ear to ear, certainly right now. Now, we're sticking at offensive tackle, but moving to the class of 2026. The number one overall player in the class of 2026 is offensive tackle Jackson Cantwell. He trimmed his list of schools that he is going to end up with down to 6. So 6 finalists right now for the number one player in the 26 class. You've got the aforementioned Michigan. You've got Ohio State. And, of course, you've got the Oregon Ducks. Man, what Dan Lanning is doing with this 26 class, it's the number one class in all of college football. It seems like when you see a top-rated recruit and, top 50, top 100 recruit really trim his list, it always seems like the Oregon Ducks are in there, right? So and that's exactly where they are. So we'll see if Jackson, the number one player in the country, winds up at a Big Ten school. Last bullet point that I want to talk about, and it creates a bridge into our first topic as well. Brennan Carroll is leaving his position as Washington's offensive coordinator and offensive line coach to become the offensive line coach under his dad, Pete Carroll, who is now at the Las Vegas Raiders. So what does that mean? It means Washington is looking for a new offensive coordinator, and it means Washington is going to be hiring 2 new coordinators, as we saw Steve Belichick follow his dad to go over to North Carolina. And then they brought in Ryan Walters. So you had 2 legacies that were the coordinators at Washington, and they're leaving to follow their dads. So, I guess that's what you get maybe when you hire legacy guys like a Carroll and like a Belichick. But they're going to be looking now for an offensive coordinator. That creates the bridge. Talking about Pete Carroll yet again. Talking about another Big Ten offensive coordinator that he is bringing onto his staff with the Las Vegas Raiders. Pete Carroll never had a bad time dealing with Big Ten competition when he was the head coach at USC in the Rose Bowl, and it seems like that trend is certainly continuing on. He is hiring Chip Kelly to be his offensive coordinator. And not only is he hiring Chip Kelly, he is making Chip Kelly football's highest paid coordinator. A cool $6 million a year. So now we talked about Washington is going to be looking for 2 new coordinators. The defending national champion Ohio State Buckeyes are also going to be looking for 2 new coordinators. They're also going to be looking for an offensive line coach as Justin Fry. He did a really good job when they had to deal with that shuffling with injuries this season. He was kind of able to keep it together, and he was able to him and Ryan Day and the staff was able to do a really good job solidifying that unit. He's going to be becoming the offensive line coach at the Arizona Cardinals, and you see the price that is being paid right now for Ohio State for winning a championship. I'm going to put a pin in that, but I first want to talk about Chip Kelly right now. And he has left behind a fantastic legacy in the college game. And I say that in a past tense matter because when Chip Kelly left his head coaching position at UCLA and he was kind of looking for other opportunities, we all know why, right? He didn't want to deal with boosters. He didn't want to deal with NIL, right? He just wanted to sit in a room. He wanted to watch film. He wanted to put together a game plan. He wanted to do what we're doing right now, what we're doing in this show. He wanted to talk ball. That's what he was focused on. And now he was kind of floated out there that maybe some NFL jobs could be interested in him last season. Of course, when Bill O'Brien left, that created an opportunity, a bridge, so to speak, to the NFL with this 1 year at Ohio State. But now Chip Kelly is in his early 60s. I can't remember if he's 61, 62 years old. I think he might be turning 62 next in November, coming up here in 2025. But considering his age, considering, I think, what mentality he has as it pertains to his view in the college game and what he wants to do and how it fits maybe a little bit more into the professional game right now, considering that this is a first year and considering his age, like I mentioned before, I don't think we're going to see Chip Kelly back in the college game. I think Chip Kelly is going to remain in the National Football League maybe for the remainder of his career. Of course, you never say never. Of course, maybe things could not go as planned, certainly in Vegas over there with Pete Carroll. But I just don't see it happening. But what a legacy that he has left behind. Right, he was truly a trailblazer in the up-tempo, in the spread offense and spread option and no huddle, right, as the offensive coordinator under Mike Bellotti at Oregon, eventually being promoted to be the head coach, and the success that he was able to have there, and then moving over to the NFL. Of course, what he was, he was a head coach at UCLA there for a while as well. I remember that great year, Dorian Thompson-Robinson, Zach Charbonnet on that year. They had a good team. They had a good team that year as well over there at UCLA. But he has certainly left behind a great legacy in the world of football in general, and specifically the world in college football. Now let's kind of circle back. And the price that is paid. When we talk about price and we talk about Ohio State, everybody talks about the $20 million roster. The price that was paid literally financially to be able to retain a lot of these guys, bring them back for one more season to make one more successful run for a national championship. Now that has been accomplished, Ohio State is paying the price on the back end of this. A price that was paid by Nick Saban when they won championship after championship after championship after championship, year after year after year, they rotated coordinator after coordinator after coordinator. Right? We talk about the Nick Saban Rehabilitation Coaching Clinic has been thrown out there for fired head coaches, but he was able to also bring in offensive coordinator and defensive coordinators, and he was still able to maintain the same standard. And now that's going to be the challenge for Ohio State. You did it, Ryan Day. You climbed to the top of the college football mountain. You did it. Now can you continue to do it? Okay, you had Jim Knowles. You had Chip Kelly. Maybe one of the better coordinator combinations that we have seen in recent times, and we will see in recent times. And there are the thing about the price that is going to be paid, Ohio State, you know, they are going to pay top dollar, and they are going to aim for the highest of the high for a coordinator. So if you have a coordinator that you like, you better hold on to him. You better do your best to be able to hold on to him at this particular point in time. But now the challenge for Ohio State is going to be, can they continue to have that elite level? Can they do it coordinator after coordinator after coordinator? Because when you are an elite team in college football, your assistant coaches, more than likely, are going to leave for greener pastures. They're going to leave for better opportunities, whether it's the National Football League, whether it's an opportunity to become a head coach maybe eventually down the line as well. That is going to happen. So it's going to be interesting to see if Ohio State can maintain that. They are losing a lot on the sidelines and on the field from this national championship team. Last thing that I want to talk about as it pertains to this is Brian Hartline. I'm very curious to see what happens. He's been passed over as a play caller. He's never been a play caller ever in his coaching career, so we got to make sure we certainly say that. But he's been passed over for this specific position. He's done a great job with the wide receivers. He's as good as it gets when it comes to a wide receiver recruiter. He's as good as it gets when it comes to a wide receiver developer, certainly, of talent. In the last couple of years, like this last 5, 6, 7 year period, Ohio State is wide receiver U. They are pumping out great receiver after great receiver, and they're bringing in great receiver after great receiver. I just think there's eventually going to come a situation, there's eventually going to become a time where there's going to be an opportunity for Brian Hartline. Whether it is an opportunity to call plays and be an offensive coordinator, or whether it's an opportunity to maybe be a head coach out there, there is going to be an opportunity at some point for Brian Hartline. How long is this thing going to go down the line for Brian? And how long is Ohio State going to be able to keep him there? I think that's going to be the big question. They want to keep him there as long as possible, but because, man, they want to continue this run of wide receivers as long as they possibly can. But you know there's going to become a point in time where Brian Hartline will leave Ohio State. I would be surprised. I would be surprised if Ohio State does hire Brian Hartline as the offensive coordinator. I think they proved last year going out, getting Bill O'Brien first, and then when he left to go to BC, getting Chip Kelly, that they are willing to pay top dollar. They are willing to swing for the fences. They are willing to poach anybody to fill their coordinator position. So like I said, if you're a Big Ten program or if you're another college football program out there, you like your coordinator, maybe throw him an extra bucks, maybe take him out for a nice steak dinner, really say, hey, we appreciate you and we want to keep you here, certainly. This extended college football season with the college football playoff maybe created a problem for a Big Ten host like myself as, hey, you want to cover these teams, you want to put your investment into these teams as they make their playoff run on the field, but at the very same time, you've got a whole lot of transfer portal movement going on. Now that the season has ended and now that the winter transfer portal has basically come and gone, it's really time to take a look at the top 2 players, the top duos for every Big Ten team that are going to be able to fill a gap, fill a hole that is left with some departing players, and make an impact in 2025. Let's be hospitable. Let's thank our West Coast brethren for the great year that they had, and let's start with them. So let's start west and let's move east. No team had a better 2024. No team had a better inaugural season in the Big Ten than the Oregon Ducks, the Big Ten champions. Let's start with them. Now, one thing with Oregon, if you look at the past 2 years and how they've bowed out of a potential national championship, it's been their secondary. And when you look at the secondary for 2025, it's like a line change. 5 guys out, hopping over the boards. 5 guys in, hopping over the boards, going onto the ice. If there's one guy that they really expect to make an elite impact, it's Dylan Thieneman, the transfer from Purdue, safety. He was highly sought after. He is one of the top defensive players in the entire transfer portal. And for Oregon to be able to nab him was absolutely huge, I think, for the development and the turnover and what their secondary is certainly going to look like this season. He was one of the most sought-after prospects overall, not just at safety, not just on defense, but overall in the transfer portal in the cycle. A 2-time All-Big Ten guy, had 100 tackles and I think 6 interceptions his first year. He can do it all. He can do it all at safety. He can play the back third. He can come up and play the run. But here's the thing about what his situation is going to be like at Oregon as opposed to what his situation was like at Purdue. I think he was able to put up the numbers that he did at Purdue because there was so much expected of him. Because the scheme wasn't very good, the personnel wasn't very good, the coaching maybe wasn't great, certainly around him. But now you're going to have great defensive players in the defensive line. You're going to have great defensive players in the linebacker. You're going to have great defensive players around you in the secondary. And I don't think Dylan Thieneman is going to be asked to do as much. And I think Dylan Thieneman is certainly okay with that. Let's talk about the running back position. Mekhi Hughes transferring in from Tulane. He's had back-to-back 1,300-yard seasons. He had over 1,400 yards rushing this past season at Tulane. Oregon needed a Jordan James replacement. With all due respect to guys like a Noah Whittington or a DeJuan Riggs or a Jay Harris and some of these running backs still on the roster for the Ducks, those weren't going to be guys that were going to be able to step up into a number 1 role. Like you saw in the Rose Bowl, what happened when Jordan James went down, what happened to their run game. So they needed to go out into the transfer portal, and they needed to be able to get a number 1 guy. And they got one of the best transfers in the portal, and they got one of the best running backs in the portal. I love how Mekhi Hughes is going to be able to plug and play into the system, and that gives them, I really like their run game. I love what they've done with their interior offensive line. Think about Iapani Lalaolu or Pancho that's coming back at center. Emmanuel Pregnon comes in, a transfer from USC, who was one of the best IOLs in this last portal cycle. Dave Iuli or Matthew Bedford is going to be at the other guard as well. I really like what the Ducks have in the run game. So these are 2 pretty high caliber transfers, certainly for the Oregon Ducks, but certainly a lot to choose from in this Oregon class as well. Let's head down to Los Angeles, California. Let's talk about, I just talked about running back for Oregon. I'm going to talk about running back coming in for USC because you lose Woody Marks. Quentin Joyner was a big loss. Man, that was a big loss. He went and he transferred out to Texas Tech. You needed a solution in the backfield. So you go to the group of 5 level and you get a 1,000-yard rusher in Eli Sanders coming in from New Mexico. He had 9 touchdowns last season as well when you combine it with getting over the century mark as well. He's got good speed. Does he have great high-end elite level speed? I'm not sure if I would go there quite yet with Eli Sanders, but the thing that I see from him is a home run ability. He's a smaller guy. He's a smaller back. He's a quicker back. I think he's going to be able to come in and certainly play a role. Is he going to be a 1,000-yard rusher like Woody Marks? I'm not certain that he's going to be because I think we're going to see more. If he's the Lightning, we're going to see more of the Thunder, I think, in Brian Jackson to be able to combine with that as well. But this is certainly was a position of need for USC. Now you go to the defensive side of the football. I like the way this defensive line is coming together for USC, and you look at the transfer from Kentucky in Keyshawn Silver, big body, 6'4", 336 pounds. He's got experience playing the last couple of years in the SEC as well. You combine Silver with Devin Tompkins, another transfer in Jamal Jarrett, another really big body coming in from Georgia. Like when I looked at USC last season and I looked around at their football team and I'm like, they need beef. They need some Big Ten beef in the middle. Keyshawn Silver was a big part of getting that beef. I mentioned Jamal Jarrett. He's another big body in there as well. You've got Jakeem Stewart Thanos, the great true freshman that's in there. Kobe Pepe. Like, you got all these guys in the middle. And then you like Anthony Lucas, the Braylon Shelbys, the Cam Fountains over there on the defensive end positions. Like, this is a really good group, I think, up front of the defensive line. And I think that they are going to be developed very well by Eric Henderson and this coaching staff as well. They've brought in, USC has brought in a lot of NFL type of coaches on the defensive side. We saw a big jump in year one for USC. I think we're going to continue to see that jump. And getting those big bodies at the defensive tackle, those space eater, just eating gaps, that's going to help out USC, I think, a lot next season. Let's head back up to the Pacific Northwest, and let's go to Seattle, Washington. Now, Washington, we're going to be talking about their offense here in just a minute, but when you look at them from a defensive standpoint, they got a lot to figure out because they're losing a lot in terms of guys that ran out of eligibility and guys that left the program by entering the transfer portal. One of the biggest names that left Washington that entered the portal was Thaddeus Dixon. He transferred over to North Carolina. Steve Belichick, the former defensive coordinator, of course, he's over at UNC now. So they needed to try to backfill some of these defensive back positions. And I thought they did a really good job going out and getting Tacario Davis over from Arizona, another Arizona Wildcat. So a lot of Washington Wildcat kind of flavor coming in, especially at the cornerback position. Tacario was the number one corner in the transfer portal. He was a second-team All-Big 12, a Jim Thorpe Award semifinalist this past season. Now, there are some questions to answer, I think, of the front seven and at safety for Washington on their defense. But when I look at this corner combination, you get Ephesians Prysock on one side, and you get Tacario Davis on the other side. That's a corner combination that you got to feel really good about if you're Ryan Walters and this Washington defense right now. Let's head over to the offensive side. There's a lot to be excited about at the skill position for the Washington Huskies. This is not the first time that I'm saying that. Of course, Devon Williams at quarterback. You're going to bring back a 1,000-yard rusher in Jonah Coleman. Over there at running back, Denzel Boston is going to return at wide receiver. But because the Jonte Cook situation did not work out in more ways than one, certainly, they needed to bring in another high-level wide receiver to pair with Denzel Boston. And they went out and got Amari Evans transferring over from Penn State. 415 yards and 5 touchdowns last year for the Nittany Lions. Now, he was their deep threat down the field. When Penn State did stretch the ball down the field, when Drew Aller was looking for a big play down the field, Amari Evans was the guy they looked to. And now you got two threats on either side with Denzel Boston and Amari Evans. I think there's a chance, I think that there's actually a very good chance that we could see more production for Amari Evans in 2025 at Washington than certainly 2024 at Penn State. I think the offense really plays into that for the Huskies, certainly next season. Let's go out to Westwood and talk about what's going on at UCLA. Now, I could have put some defensive transfers on this list because there are guys that are coming in that are going to have to make an impact because when you lose Braylon Addison in the secondary, when you lose one of the best linebackers in the Big Ten, if not all of college football, and Carson Schlesinger, when you lose Jay Toye on the defensive line, when you lose your top player at every level of your defense, there's going to be players that need to come in and certainly be able to fill those gaps. But when I look at UCLA, this is the 4th-ranked transfer portal class in the Big Ten. I think Deshaun Foster has done a good job, certainly this offseason. But when I look at UCLA and I wanted to select my pair for the Bruins, I'm looking to a spot where I believe, I kind of look around at UCLA's team and I don't see a ton of strengths, but one area where I could see a strength is the passing game. And that's where I want to focus on a quarterback that they brought in and a wide receiver that they brought in that have chemistry and time together as they're both transferring in from Appalachian State. Quarterback Joey Aguilar, over 6,700 yards and 56 touchdowns the last 2 seasons over there at App State. Caden Robinson, a wide receiver, over 1,700 yards and 12 touchdowns over the last 2 seasons. He had 10 touchdowns in 2023. So that's going to be the combination. If UCLA is maybe going to give some teams fits at certain points during the season, I think it's going to be because of this passing game. So you take that as kind of your transfer building block for this offense. And then you combine it with Quasi Gilmer's coming back, Rico Flores is coming back, and I think the big part that could really tie it all together for the UCLA Bruins, Tino Sunseri is coming in as the offensive coordinator, replacing Eric Bieniemy. He was the co-OC and quarterbacks coach at Indiana last season. So he took Curtis Rourke, a transfer, in a one-year scenario, and we all know what happened with Indiana's offense last season. Yeah, I know a lot of credit is going to go to Kurt Cignetti. It's going to go to Mike Shanahan. But Tino was also a pretty darn big part of that. So if he can take Joey Aguilar and turn him into that type of quarterback, this could be a passing offense that could be feared throughout the Big Ten Conference. Let's head into the next four. I call it the Quad of Hate. Let's start with the Minnesota Golden Gophers. Now, Minnesota, this is another top 5 transfer portal class right now. It's the 5th ranked portal class. I think PJ Fleck did a really good job getting guys that can come in and make an impact right away in Minnesota in 2025. I feel really good about the Gophers. I think Minnesota's got a really good team entering next season. Now, Minnesota, I think a big place of need was the wide receiver position. They lost their top 2 wide receivers, Elijah Spencer, Daniel Jackson. He's been a stalwart in this passing game. That is certainly a big loss for the Golden Gophers. And they had good wide receivers coming in. I flirted with putting Logan Loya. He's kind of that slot receiver. He's that Wes Welker and Julian Edelman type, the kind of that annoying type that's going to get you 7 to 8 yards and keep on moving the chains and make the plays in the middle of the field, certainly. Malachi Coleman, a former top 100 player in the country, 4-star type of kid. Didn't work out for him at Nebraska. Transferring over to Minnesota, he's got the potential to maybe evolve into one of the diamonds of this transfer portal class around the Big Ten and around college football. But I went with production over potential. I went with Javon Tracy. I think he could be the highest impact of them all. 818 yards, 7 touchdowns, first team All-MAC last year over there at wide receiver. They're kind of looking for someone to pair with a veteran in Lemeki Brockington. I think Javon Tracy could be the burner, could have the speed, the explosiveness, certainly on the outside, to help out whoever is the starting quarterback for Minnesota. That's a big question for the Golden Gophers, whether it's going to be Drake Lindsey or whether it's going to be Zach Pyron, who transfers in over there from Georgia Tech. Let's over to the defensive side of the football. Now, I like a lot about Minnesota's defense right now. I like their defensive line. Now, although they lose John Joyner and Danny Strigo, guys like Anthony Smith and Jackson Howard, I think, are going to be able to come in and fill those holes. I feel really good about their defensive line. Maverick Baranowski and Devin Williams coming back at the linebacker position, certainly as well. You look to the secondary. Coy Parrish, Kerry Brown, a couple of young safeties, I think, that are going to be expected to certainly have bigger seasons next season. Corner is the big question. You lose a guy that's been starting for, 3 years? It seems like he's been starting forever in Justin Wall and Ethan Robinson as well. So they need somebody to fill in at corner. And when I looked at this class, I look at Jalen Bowden, a transfer from North Carolina Central. Minnesota, you got to give them the benefit of the doubt when they go out and get a transfer defensive back. Trevion Jones, I mentioned Ethan Robinson as well, have been able to fill these holes fairly well the last couple of years via the transfer portal at Minnesota. He has a 83.9 Pro Football Focus coverage grade. So he's going to have the opportunity to come in and possibly be a number 1 corner. And the corners that come in to this Minnesota team need to be good because there's a lot surrounding them that is also very good. Minnesota's got the potential to be a really, really good team in 2025. Let's head over to their big rival. Let's go to Iowa City right now. You know, it's Iowa football. Iowa's going to have a really good defense despite what they lose. Iowa's going to have a good run game with Kamari Moulton and Jazz Patterson back there. When I look at Iowa, it's all about diversifying what they do on offense, getting better in the passing game and creating that much more balance. Because although I think the run game is going to be really good for Iowa next year, is it going to be 1,500 yards good? Is it going to be Caleb Johnson good? That is certainly not a guarantee. So you need to be better in the passing game. And, you know, the more I kind of research into Mark Gronowski, the South Dakota State transfer that's coming into Iowa at quarterback, the more I really like it. Mark Gronowski is as experienced as you can get. Mark Gronowski is as big of a winner as you can get, and I love that. He started 4 seasons at South Dakota State, won the Walter Payton Award, the Heisman Trophy equivalent in 2023 for the guys at the FCS level, a 2-time national champion, and he was a national championship game MVP in those 2 years, a first-team All-American in 2023, a 49-6 record, over 10,000 yards passing, 93 touchdowns, and 20 interceptions. There is no doubt this is an upgrade at the quarterback position for the Iowa Hawkeyes. This is maybe the best quarterback they've had since like Nate Stanley. Okay, I think this is one of the bigger impact quarterbacks in the Big Ten this season. And then when you look at Iowa, it's been run game, it's been tight ends, short passing, that type of stuff. So they need some explosiveness. They need a playmaker at wide receiver. And they're hoping Sam Phillips can be that guy. A wide receiver transfer from Chattanooga, 823 yards, 3 touchdowns last season. He led the SoCon in receiving yards. Not a big guy, but he's got a lot of speed. You need big-time playmakers plus players outside of the Reese Vanderzees and the Jacob Gills, and we already mentioned the tight ends and all that, to diversify this offense so it's not so easy to defend. I think you're going to have to be a little bit diverse, because like I said, it's no guarantee the run game is going to be as successful as it was last season. Let's head to Madison, Wisconsin. You know, when a transfer quarterback comes in, I mean, that's as much of an impact position as there is, right? So you're going to put the guy in that position. This is one that I flirted with not putting a quarterback in, but I am going to talk about Billy Edwards here. Certainly. Now, Billy Edwards he threw for a lot of yards last season, but there was some inconsistencies certainly to his games. There'd be games where he looked really good. There'd be other games where maybe he'd turn the football over certainly a little bit. But here's the thing, what Wisconsin needs from Billy Edwards. Remember, this offense is going to look a little bit different. Phil Longo out the door. Jeff Grimes, the former offensive coordinator at Kansas, is in the door. I think that this is a Wisconsin offense that is going to invest a little bit more in the run game. Maybe a lot more, certainly in the run game. I think that this Wisconsin offense is going to look more like Wisconsin offenses of old. The big thing for Billy Edwards, be consistent. Be something Wisconsin can rely on. Wisconsin has not been able to rely on the quarterback position at all during the Luke Fickell era. Tanner Mordecai was not the passer that we thought he would be, and then he got hurt. You look what happened with Tyler Van Dyke. He got hurt. Braden Locke came in each one of those situations, and he was not a consistent. He was not a good quarterback. He was not somebody that you could lean on. All Wisconsin is looking for, give me the season, play the year, give me some consistency, give me something that I can lean on. And this is something where I don't think Wisconsin is going to expect Billy Edwards to make a ton of plays down the field, maybe like Maryland did. When I look at this run game, good amount of the offensive line. I think there's 3 guys that are going to be coming back from an old and experienced offensive line. And then I look at the running backs. Darian Dupree, you saw him as a true freshman last year. He got a lot of time, certainly. Dylan Jones was a higher-rated recruit than Darian Dupree, both high 4-star guys. And then Cade Yakimelli in there as well. I think this run game is going to be the center, and that's what Jeff Grimes wants to focus on as the offensive coordinator. So I think they're getting back to Wisconsin football a little bit more as well. I think one part where they're going to get back to Wisconsin football a little bit more is getting the tight end a little bit more involved. And when you have a talent like a Tanner Koziel who transfers over from Ball State, you can understand why you want to get him more involved. 94 catches last season. 94. 839 yards and 8 touchdowns at Ball State last season. 6'7", 239 pounds. Obviously more of a pass catcher, certainly, in this offense. I would expect Wisconsin to use the tight end a little bit more. I think Tanner Koziel maybe creates a little bit more of advantageous matchups in the passing game with his speed, his agility, and his size, whether he's matched up against a safety, whether he's matched up even against a corner, whether he's matched up against the linebacker. There's an advantage there in every one of those situations. I look to the wide receiver position for Wisconsin, with Will Pauling leaving the program, you got a Trech Kekahuna. I think you got Bryson Green coming back. You got some of these guys, and I know the transfers, Jaden Ballard and Mark Hamper. I just don't see a lot of plus players. With no Will Pauling in this wide receiver group, I don't see a lot of guys where it's like, yeah, we got to get him the ball consistently. He's going to be able to separate and make plays consistently. That's why I think you're going to see more of the tight end. You're going to see more of Tanner Kojal here in 2025. Let's finish up this quad of hate talking about the Nebraska Cornhuskers. You know, this might be one of two teams, very few teams in this group, where I did two players and one position group. But I did hear for Nebraska. Certainly I could have looked at some players on the defensive side of the ball. I could have went for Williams Winery or Dason McCullough or some of these other defensive transfers that are certainly coming in. But I think one area that it was extremely important to Nebraska's success, or maybe not success last season, and it's going to be ultra important to their success this season, is the offensive line. Now, injuries were a big part, I think, of maybe what happened over the course of the season last year. But this is a group that needs to be better. If Nebraska wants to get to an 8-win level, if they want to get to a 9-win level, they need to be better. Nebraska allowed 28 sacks last season. That was 78th in the country. When you have a quarterback as talented as Dylan Raiola, you can't be giving up that much pressure. You just can't. So you went out into the transfer portal, and you got, in my opinion, two really, really good offensive linemen, one in the interior, one over at tackle. Let's start in the interior. Rocco Spindler, transferring over from Notre Dame. He started 23 games in his Notre Dame career over there at right guard. He allowed just 2 sacks in 1,325 snaps, just 10 pressures in 402 pass plays in 2024. I think he's going to be an anchor of the interior of this offensive line. You know, when you think of Nebraska offensive linemen of old, you think of the Remingtons of the world. You think of just these tough Midwestern farm boys, right? I'm going to read you a quote from a video feature that Rocco Spindler says, and you tell me if this doesn't scream Midwest farm boy run the damn football. Quote, moving a guy against his will, driving him 5 or 10 yards back, and then finishing him in the ground on his back and hearing the air come out of his lungs is probably the best thing you can get from an offensive lineman. All right, I'm ready to play now. I don't want to match up against Rocco Spindler, do you? Yeah, he's a big addition, certainly, to the interior of this offensive line. And then you look to tackle. Tackle's an interesting position, which I'll maybe get into here in just a little bit. Elijah Pritchett, transferring over from Alabama. He played in 29 games during his Bama career, a former 5-star recruit, started 11 games at right tackle last season. He was the number 4 offensive tackle in the transfer portal. Now, pass protection is huge. I'm very intrigued to see how this is all going to work out. Teddy Prohaska can come back. He's coming off of an injury that he suffered in fall camp. He suffered multiple injuries during his Nebraska career. You have Turner Corcoran, who's going to come back next season as well. Now, Turner has played multiple positions. He's played inside during his Nebraska career. I think we're going to see Elijah Pritchett, certainly at tackle, be able to improve that position over there as well. These two guys need to plug and play. They need to be good for this run game to get going. There were times last season where the run game just wasn't there. It was non-existent. So they need, especially like the Rocco Spindlers of the world, to drive guys into the ground, to take the air out of their lungs, like he said during that feature. And then you need pass protection. You need to be able to give Dylan Raiola time for him to truly be able to develop during his sophomore season. Let's head forward to the states, schools in states that begin with I's. States, schools in the states of Illinois and Indiana. You know, everybody's talking about Illinois. Hey, they're a way too early top 10. They're a way too early top 15. Look at all these guys that the Fighting Illini have coming back, and they do have a lot coming back, but there is one position where they need to fill some gaps, where there was a lot of production last season, and it's wide receiver. When you lose Pat Bryant, one of the top receivers in the Big Ten, he was not talked about enough this past year. When you lose Zachary Franklin, you need someone to step up. You need to go to the transfer portal and bring somebody in, and I think that's where Hudson Clement really comes into play. coming over from West Virginia. 741 yards, 5 touchdowns. He's a smart receiver. He's a good route runner. He's experienced. I think he can be reliable, certainly, within this offense. And I think there's guys, the Malik Elzeys, the Hank Beatties, and others of the world that I think are going to be able to certainly step up and create a good wide receiver room. The wide receiver room, do I see it being like last year? Do I see a Pat Bryant that can be a guy that can be top 5 in the Big Ten in receiving? I'm not sure if I see that. But the sum of its parts, I think, can be pretty strong next season for Illinois. I looked at the defensive side of the football for the other impact transfer for the Illini, and boy, did they just get a whole bunch of Wisconsin guys. Brett Bielema smiling and saying, "Yeah, I'm bringing guys that from my old school coming in on the D line." They bring in Leon Lowry, they bring in Kurt Neal at the defensive tackle position, and also James Thompson Jr. Now, James Thompson Jr. suffered a season-ending injury in fall camp, but he was Wisconsin's best defensive lineman before he got hurt. He combined for 5 sacks and 13 tackles for loss in 2022 and 2023. Now, he's going to be a guy that's going to be coming off the edge. He's going to be a guy that's going to be looking to get those sacks and get pressure and create those tackles for loss, certainly in the backfield. You got a guy on the other side for Illinois that's going to be one of the top rushers, I think, in the Big Ten next year, in Gabe Akis. So putting James Thompson Jr. on the other side maybe allows JTJ to be able to put up more production when the attention is focused on Akis and containing him on the other side. But then when he gets a lot of pressure, that maybe allows one-on-one matchups for Gabe Akis on the other side. So having both those guys as the bookends in the pass rush, I think is going to help everybody out defensively for Illinois. All right, well, there's a lot to choose from for Purdue when you've got this many guys going out and you've got this many guys coming in. Like I said before, when there is a quarterback transfer coming in, for how much of an impact position that is, it's the most important position, you're probably going to go with the quarterback. And I'm going with Malachi Singleton. He's a former 4-star recruit, former top 20 quarterback in the country. He's a young quarterback. He'll be a sophomore. It'll be his second year in college. He did play a little bit at Arkansas. I watched some of his Arkansas versus Ole Miss film, and there is certainly some promise, but he is still a young quarterback. I think the thing that really impressed me was the ability that he has in the designed quarterback run game. So I think there's a threat as well. So we'll see if Barry Odom and this offensive coaching staff can kind of structure the offense, certainly, around him as well. Defense. So if you got, I'm going quarterback and I'm going pass rusher. CJ Nunali comes over from Akron. 13 sacks over the past 2 seasons at Akron. He was a first-team All-MAC in 23 and 24. 11 TFLs and 2 forced fumbles last season. I think he's going to fill that Will Helt role. Will Helt had 6 sacks last year. He transferred out, and he's going to Clemson. So if you can have, I know it's the first year of a defense, and they're trying to restructure this thing, and they're trying to improve somehow, some way. I think a good start, if you can get pressure on the quarterback, that's a pretty good start. Now, CJ Nunali, he's not going to be an ultra big guy. He's going to use his speed. He's going to use his explosiveness to get to the quarterback. Let's talk about the Northwestern Wildcats right now. I like this transfer duo. If Northwestern can get 2023 Preston Stone at quarterback, they'll be in a really good situation. I talked about a quarterback upgrade at Iowa. Yeah, this is a big quarterback upgrade. I think no matter what you get out of Preston Stone for next season. Mike Wright wasn't it, right? Jack Louge wasn't it at quarterback. They certainly took maybe multiple steps down from where Ben Bryant was the year before, and I think that's what you're looking to get from Preston Stone at quarterback for Northwestern. 2023, over 3,000 yards, 28 touchdowns, 6 interceptions. He was expected to be one of the top quarterbacks in the ACC coming in this season. But it didn't work out. Kevin Jennings took over. Preston Stone got benched. So that's the big question. Which Preston Stone are the Wildcats going to get next season? If they get good Preston Stone, this could maybe be the steal of the transfer portal. On the defensive side, I go with Purdue transfer at linebacker, Yanni Karlaftis. He solidifies maybe the best unit on the team, and that being linebacker. You combine Yanni with an all Big Ten linebacker like Matt Rhule. You got Kenny Soares in that group as well. Karlaftis had back-to-back seasons with over 50 tackles. I got a feeling that playing in this system at Northwestern that David Braun and this defensive coaching staff is going to get the most out of a guy like Yanni Karlaftis. And I think playing with better talent, I think he's going to be better. I think he's going to be very good. I think this is going to be a really good group at linebacker, certainly for the Wildcats. Let's finish with the Indiana Hoosiers in this specific group. How do you replicate 2024? How do you replicate 11-1? How do you replicate the offensive turnaround that Curt Cignetti and Mike Shanahan had? Well, you go out and you get one of the top quarterbacks in the transfer portal in Fernando Mendoza, the transfer over from Cal last year, over 3,000 yards, 16 touchdowns, and 6 interceptions. This point says a lot. He picked IU over Georgia and Miami. That really is a testament to where Curt Cignetti and Mike Shanahan have this offense and how attractive of an option that it is for transfer quarterbacks. He's the number 3 transfer quarterback in the portal, certainly, right now. And then when you look at kind of what he has to go with, you bring in Roman Hemby coming in from Maryland in the backfield, Kalon Black. I think you're going to have a good running back tandem in there. And then you look at wide receiver, Elijah Surratt is back. Omar Cooper is back. I think Fernando Mendoza has the potential in this offense with what's around him to be one of the better quarterbacks in the Big Ten next season. Now, when Indiana fell short in those 2 games, when they fell short to Ohio State, when they fell short to Notre Dame, what was the big key? Quarterback, wide receiver, skill players, they can be this good, and they were that good for Indiana last season, but it came down to the offensive line. They couldn't block Ohio State, and they had trouble in the trenches against Notre Dame. There may be no better offensive lineman available than Pat Coogan. Pat Coogan transfers in from Notre Dame. He started 26 games for Notre Dame. He started at left guard. He's also started at center. Adding a player of his ability, I think, is going to make everybody better up front, even though they probably need to be better more at tackle than anything in protecting the passer in some of these big game situations against some of the better fronts in college football. Having a guy like this is certainly, I think, going to make this entire group really come together. Both Fernando Mendoza and Pat Coogan, top 20 players overall in the transfer portal. Let's move on to our last group of schools, the schools out east. Let's start with the Maryland Terrapins. So Billy Edwards transfers out at quarterback. MJ Morris transfers out at quarterback. I know they've got somebody they're really excited about in a freshman, 4-star Malik Washington. But I'm not sure how ready he is for college football quite yet. So they needed a little bit of an experienced transfer to come in. And that's where you get Justin Martin coming in for UCLA. I think there's some potential there. I'm not sure how much potential there is, certainly right now. He's a former 4-star recruit coming out of high school. I saw him. He played in that UCLA big noon game when they played Penn State. And he was doing pretty good in the first half. He was kind of keeping UCLA in that football game a little bit as well. 6'4", 220 pounds. I'm curious to see what the dynamic is going to be with him and the aforementioned Malik Washington. And we're going to be talking about freshman quarterbacks in a little bit, how short the leash is going to be for the veterans in the room. I think the leash is going to be longer for a guy like Justin Martin as compared to the situations at Michigan and at USC. I think there's just a lot in the air. There's a lot of what ifs. There's kind of a lot of uncertainty how he's going to be maybe compared to what they saw from Billy Edwards last season. Now you look to the defensive side of the football. Maryland gave up the 3rd most passing yards in the Big Ten last season. You need to solidify something at the corner spot because prior to last year, Maryland was kind of establishing a tradition of putting corners and defensive backs into the National Football League. Dante Joyner is a big add from Arkansas State. 50 tackles, 2 INTs, 7 PBUs last season. He's a do-everything cornerback, coming up and play the run, good man coverage zone, all that sort of stuff. He'll likely start opposite of Jalen Husky, who started 11 games last season. If you have a Maryland defense that once again gives up a lot of big plays down the field, I think there's some newness on offense. I'm not sure how much this offense is going to be able to counter that if the defense kind of remains the same as it was last season. Now, when we look at all of these transfer duos, there may be no more transfer duo that I'm excited about than the one at Michigan, Justice Haynes and Damon Payne. Let's start first on offense with Justice Haynes. Both of these guys transferring over from Alabama, so they like what they saw, certainly, over in Tampa, right? With Khalil Mullins moving on and Donovan Edwards moving on, a new Michigan duo is set to take over. Like, when you look at Justice Haynes, he's a former 5-star in the class of 2023. 24/7 put him on their all-freaks list that year. He was the number 1 running back in the transfer portal this cycle. He rushed for 448 yards and 7 touchdowns, combining with like Jam Miller over there at Alabama. But now if he's the number 1 back, you put him into a number 1 role in this offense, behind this offensive line, and you combine him with Jordan Marshall, who you saw in the aforementioned bowl game. There's a lot to be excited about. Certainly over there at Michigan. I think that this duo is going to get back to smash. Now, they certainly did a good job running the football last season, but now you balance it with a better passing attack, and that certainly provides some optimism for what the Michigan offense can be next season. You look on defense with Damon Payne. Now, when you lose Kenneth Grant, when you lose Mason Graham. Now, they do have decent depth players. They have good depth players at defensive tackle, but they needed someone to kind of play at that starting level, maybe close to that all Big Ten type of level. I think Damon Payne could possibly come in and do that, coming over from Alabama. Another highly recruited player with a lot of power to experience. 6'4", 313 pounds. I would expect him maybe next to Rayshawn Benny at the defensive tackle spot. Look, there may be no combination at defensive tackle at Michigan or any other school from now until the sun explodes better than Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant. There's a reason why they're projected to go as high as they are in the NFL draft, because they're great players. But this combination, I think, could be really good. I'm really excited about what Michigan's going to be, both offensively in the run game that I talked about and defensively with what they have up front on the defensive line. Let's go to their Paul Bunyan Trophy rival in the Michigan State Spartans. Okay, so I want to start with the run game, because you lose K'Ron Lynch-Adams, you lose Nate Carter. Somebody needs to step up in the backfield. With all due respect to Brandon Tullis, I'm not sure if he's that number 1 guy that's going to step up into this particular role. I think he's going to play a role. I'm just not sure if it's going to be the number 1 back that they're going to be able to lean on like they were Nate Carter and K'Ron Lynch-Adams. Elijah Tautoliver transferring in from Sacramento State. I think that's the guy on offense that I think could come in and be that impact transfer in the run game. 950 yards, 7 touchdowns last season. He had 5 100-yard games. And then somebody needs to be able to step up at wide receiver opposite of Nick Marsh. And I think that guy could be Amari Kelly from Middle Tennessee. 860 yards, 4 touchdowns, and a first-team All-Conference USA. So all of a sudden now you start to look at this offense for Michigan State. Okay, if Aiden Childs can take that big step up, really, I think this is the year where Sparty fans and a lot of fans across college football are expecting Aiden Childs to really go forward a lot this season. Jack Velling is back at tight end. I mentioned Nick Marsh and how much of a step he could make in his sophomore season. And then if Amari Kelly steps up, this could be a pretty fun passing game and a pretty fun offense to watch for the Spartans next season. Let's move on to Piscataway. Now, I tell you, Rutgers, they've got the 2nd-ranked transfer portal class in the Big Ten right now. You'd probably say, well, they took a lot of numbers. They took a lot of guys, and maybe that's why they're higher than some of these other classes. I say, no. Only 7 other teams have taken less transfers in the Big Ten. So what does that tell you about Rutgers' class? It tells you they're taking high-quality players. High-quality players are coming into Piscataway, New Jersey. So when I look and I kind of look, there's a lot of options that I certainly could have gone with, but I'm going to stick on the defensive side of the ball. Even though Rutgers was very experienced on defense last season, this was not an ultra great defense last year. So not only do they need players because they weren't a great defense, they need to upgrade maybe at certain positions, but you lose a lot of guys that were on that team last season. One area where Rutgers really fell short, I think, was getting after the quarterback, putting pressure. They were one of the worst teams in the Big Ten in finishing their pass rush situations, getting sacks, and really putting pressure on that part of an offense. And you lose Aaron Lewis, you lose Wesley Bailey, who transfers over to Louisville, so you need something there. Eric O'Neal, I think, provides a pass rush presence that's desperately needed. And he comes over from James Madison. How about 13 sacks and 19 TFLs? You know, when all those JMU guys went over to Indiana, like a guy like a James Carpenter or Mikhail Kamara, they also put up similar insane numbers from JMU as well. So Rutgers is hoping that they can have a similar impact with Eric O'Neal certainly coming over as well. Rutgers was 13th against the pass, and they brought in 3 transfers in the defensive backfield after losing almost their entire secondary, guys like Robert Longerbeam and Eric Rogers. Those were your starting corners last season, Shaquan Loyal, Flip Dixon. There's a lot gone in the secondary. So I think they're going to lean on some of these transfers. Now, I could have went with somebody like a Cam Miller who transfers over from Penn State, but I went with production, certainly right here. Jacoby Henderson transfers over from Marshall. I think he has been the most productive corner out of all of these guys. 11 PBUs and 2 interceptions last season. He had a 75.7 PFF coverage grade, and he's fast. He's a sprinter over there with the Marshall Thundering Herd as well. So I think they're going to lean on him to be able to come in and fill one of these holes at the corner spot. Need to get pass rush. Need to cover better against the pass this season. All right, let's finish off with 2 Big Ten powers. And first, the Ohio State Buckeyes. I mentioned earlier in the show just how much they are replacing both in the coaching staff and on the field. Let's start with the run game. So you lose Trevion Henderson. You lose Quinshon Judkins. And filling those holes is going to be an extremely difficult task. I think the Ohio State offense, look, they're going to bring in a new coordinator. We don't know who that's going to be quite yet. But I think this Ohio State offense is going to look a little bit different next season. I don't know if Ohio State will be as dependent on the run game, but they are going to be dependent on C.J. Donaldson being able to provide that balance as a plug-and-play impact transfer. 739 yards, 11 touchdowns on the ground in 2024. 6'2", 238. He's a powerful runner. He's got a powerful frame. So he's not going to have the breakaway speed ability like Trevion Henderson. I don't think you're going to see as many big home run type of runs for the Ohio State Buckeyes next season. I think the passing game for Ohio State is going to be really, really good, and that's maybe going to be back to the focal point of the Ohio State offense. I know they got Jeremiah Smith. I know they got Carnell Tate. They have some of the best. They've got the best wide receivers in the country, certainly out there. But I think that they're going to get the tight end a lot more involved because Max Clare transferring over from Purdue, there's a lot to be excited about there. I think he's the best tight end they've had since Kate Stover. I think there's a potential that he could be better than Kate Stover when all is said and done. 6'4", 240 pounds, clearly a pass-catching target. They're going to line him up, I think, all over the football field. 685 yards and 4 touchdowns last season at Purdue. You know, when everybody's going to be focused on Tate, everybody's going to be focused on Smith, and then you line up Max Clare in the middle of the field, now that's just another weapon. That's just another part of the pass game that you need to worry about for Ohio State. Oh, yippee, defenses are saying, just another passing target, and there's a lot of expectations for 5-star quarterback Julian Sayin to be that guy to get it to all these weapons next season. We're going to finish off with maybe the favorite to win the Big Ten title next season. We're going to finish off with the Penn State Nittany Lions. Boy, Penn State is loading up. They are bringing everybody back. There's experienced players at a lot of different positions. But there's one position where they need to elevate, where they need to be better if they want to achieve a national championship season like maybe some are expecting them to have. Wide receiver. They lose Trey Wallace. They lose Amari Evans in the transfer portal. The big question is, are they going to be better bringing in Devontae Ross from Troy and bringing in Kyron Hudson for USC? For their sake, they need to be better. You look at Devontae Ross. Now, I kind of compare him to Amari Evans and Trey Wallace. I will say this about Devontae Ross. I think he's that playmaking guy. He's got the speed and the over-the-top ability that when he touches the ball, he can take it to the house. He can create some big plays down the field. Over 1,000 yards, 11 touchdowns at Troy. He was a first-team All-Sun Belt. How about this? 5 catches, 142, and 2 tutties against Iowa this season. Now, I get it. It's Florida A&M, but still, 11 catches, 229, and 3 touchdowns certainly over there. So he's going to be the guy. If Penn State is going to make more plays down the field, it's likely going to be because of Devontae Ross. Kyron Hudson at USC, 462 yards and 3 touchdowns in 2024. Now, when I look at him and I kind of compare him to maybe the Trey Wallaces and the Amari Evans, do I see him taking a step up in his production from USC last year? Maybe a little bit, but I'm just not sure how much that we're going to see out of Kyron Hudson. Now, Kyron Hudson is a veteran presence. He's a reliable presence. Is he going to be that playmaker down the field? I still think that's a little bit of a question right now, and I still think the jury's still out whether this combination is going to be better than the previous combination. We're kind of wait and see mode right now, but hey, that's transfer land, and I'm excited to see which one of these guys can truly live up to the expectations and make the impact. They say the most popular guy on a football team can be the backup quarterback, and that may be the case in 2025 for the Michigan Wolverines and the USC Trojans. There may be no brighter future. There may be no more popular guys on these. Bryce Underwood for Michigan, from the state of Michigan. Husan Longstreet from the state of California. Both local kids, and both have all of the talent in the world and have an extremely bright future at the quarterback position. But the question is, the future may be bright, but is the future now in 2025? I think there's a good chance it just might be. I do not envy the situations that Jaden Mayava and Mikey Keene find themselves in as the, we'll call it quote-unquote incumbents, right? Because I know Mikey Keene is transferring in, but the veteran guys at quarterback that are going to have these five-star talents looking over their shoulder the whole situation. Jaden Mayava and Mikey Keene are going to have the ultimate microscope on them this season. They are going to have every throw analyzed. They are going to have every decision that they make in the passing game and the offense analyzed throughout the early part of the season because of who is right behind them on the depth chart. Now, how both of these teams approach this thing, I think, is going to be pretty different. And it's going to be really interesting to see how Lincoln Riley at USC and Sharon Moore at Michigan really approach this. I think, and they have the history of maybe approaching this in a little bit of a different way, certainly as well. Let's start with the USC Trojans. Now, I think because the difference in all of this is maybe what the expectations are for each one of these teams in 2025. So when we look at USC, this is a team, look, I know, hey, September looked really good last year, and maybe that they could have been on their way to a possible CFP type of position, but this is not a team at USC that's expected to be a CFP team or a high level and have a crazy high level of expectations. This is a building process, I think, in Southern California, certainly for USC this season, to be able to continue to get better defensively and, of course, on offense to continue to build towards the future. So this is not something where you're leaning on a signal caller that if you do go with a true freshman, whenever that may be, that you need him to make every single play at every single time. I think that there's a little bit of leniency for USC to maybe have some development of a young quarterback. And when I look at these two situations, and I'll get into this when I talk about Michigan's situation, when I look at both of these situations, I think there's a better chance for USC to go with the freshman quarterback earlier than there is for the Wolverines of Michigan. Like, when I look at Jaden Mayava, look, he's got good arm talent. He can make throws, but when it comes to decision-making, when it comes to reading defenses, he ain't it. He ain't it. Like, if you throw Jaden Mayava out there for 12 games, and I'm not saying Husan Longstreet would not make these mistakes. We don't know. We haven't seen him on a college football field yet. But when I look at Jaden Mayava, I have a feeling there's going to be a game on the schedule. I don't know which game it's going to be, but there's going to be a game on the schedule that they're going to lose that they should win because of costly turnovers. That's what I see out of a quarterback like Jaden Mayava. There is a favorable start to the season. If they want to go with Husan Longstreet from the word go, there is a favorable start for Husan to gain confidence. there is a favorable start for him to be able to learn things, because confidence is so big of a young quarterback. You throw a young quarterback into a tough non-conference game, into some tough early conference games, especially in a Power 2 conference like the Big Ten, that can kind of go south very, very, very quickly. You look at the early schedule for USC. Home against Missouri State, home against Georgia Southern, hard stop. That's a great opportunity, if they go with Husan Longstreet, to get a true freshman out there and to put up good production, get it to Jacoby Lane, get it to Makai Lemon, start to establish that chemistry, certainly just a little bit, and gain that confidence. So you're playing better and feeling better with the decisions you're making as a true freshman within this offense as well. Now, you go to your first conference game on the road in the Big Ten, okay? But you go at Purdue, a team that has all kinds of movement. They're still going to be figuring things out very early in the season with Barry Odom in his first year as the head coach of that football program. Like, if you're going to have a road game in the Big Ten early that's favorable, it's going to be at Purdue. And then the next game you come home and you got Spartans versus Trojans, whip out the swords, and you got Michigan State at home. Like, those first 4 games, if you are going to ask a freshman quarterback to come in and be at least semi-successful, I don't know if you can think of a better 4-game stretch to really start off the season than that type of situation out there. Now, once you get past that, Illinois on the road, Michigan, and at Notre Dame, and at Nebraska, that's where maybe we could have some growing pains if indeed there is a freshman quarterback that certainly goes in there as well. Now, here's what I will say about what I'm kind of looking at in terms of USC and a possible Husan Longstreet takeover this season. And maybe there's some uncertainty. I think some uncertainty in the run game puts a lot more pressure on Husan Longstreet to make plays. I'll talk about this maybe when I talk about Michigan. I trust more in Michigan's ability to call the run game and balance the run game in their offense than I do USC. There were many points during this last season where it's clear, hand the freaking ball to Woody Marks. Yet, Lincoln Riley insisted in putting the football in the air. You do that with a true freshman, I don't know how that's going to go. So we think about the uncertainty as it comes to the play calling with Lincoln Riley, but you also come uncertainty when it comes to the personnel. With no Woody Marks and no Quentin Joyner in this backfield. You've got Eli Sanders. Hey, he was a 1,000-yard back at New Mexico last season. Could he be good? Yeah, he could be good. We just don't know. I think Brian Jackson is going to get an increased role. I've got a feeling the run game is going to be pretty good, but once again, it's uncertainty. Uncertainty in exactly how this is going to be balanced out. I think one of the worst things that maybe you could do for the it could be good. Who knows? Husan Longstreet could be a great passer right out of the gate. But putting so much pressure on him right out of playing football at Centennial High School in Corona last year, now to be this guy that's putting it in the air a ton, I don't know. As a freshman quarterback, I think you want to be able to lean on the run game a little bit. I'm not sure how much that could be out there at USC. But I think there's a legitimate chance that when USC trots out there for the first game of the year, I think there's a chance that we could see Husan Longstreet as the QB1. I know we still have the spring transfer portal quarterback period as well. Let's go over to Michigan. Now, when I first talked about USC, I talked about, hey, this is not a team that's maybe a college football playoff contender. There's certainly some room to grow, and maybe you can grow with a true freshman quarterback certainly playing there as well. Michigan's different. Michigan has college football playoff expectations this season. And they should have college football playoff expectations this season because they've got a schedule that generates college football playoff expectations. Of course, they have Ohio State at the end of the year, but they get Ohio State in Ann Arbor this season. No Oregon on the schedule. No Penn State on the schedule. This is a schedule where they can get to 10-2. And because of that, how willing is Michigan going to be to put a true freshman into that situation when they want to reach that type of level? Now, I think there's two schools of thought, and it's twofold a little bit. School of thought number one, You want to go with a proven veteran guy that gives us a better chance to maybe a safer chance to be able to meet our goals. A guy that's been in those situations, although at the group of 5 level, but he's seen college football defenses, and he kind of knows, and there won't be maybe growing pains that there could be with a true freshman. What about on the flip side of it? Bryce Underwood's talent, just his sheer arm talent, could give Michigan a better chance maybe to achieve more of their goals than having someone like Mikey Keene. I think it's fairly obvious and certain when all is said and done, Bryce Underwood is going to be a better quarterback. He's going to be a better prospect for the NFL. He's going to be all these things better than Mikey Keene. But we're focusing on a vacuum in 2025. So I think there's a couple schools of thought that could go on there, certainly at Michigan. I think the start of the season is a little bit tougher for a young quarterback at Michigan than it is at USC. You look at the schedule. Home against New Mexico, but you got to go on the road to Oklahoma in week number 2. That's a good Oklahoma defense. Brent Venables is going to be calling that defense next season. It was good last year. Home against Central Michigan in week 3, and then you got to go to Nebraska. Those road games against some old Big 8 flavor with Oklahoma and Nebraska in the first 4 games of the season. Once again, you can approach this maybe a little bit twofold. What happens if Mikey Keene goes out there in the Oklahoma game, in the Nebraska game, one of the game, maybe both of the games? What if Mikey Keene goes out there and he throws for 202 yards, a touchdown, and 2 picks, and they lose to Oklahoma? That's the big, wherever it happens, that's going to be the big turning point for Michigan. When Mikey Keene has a poor performance, hell, when Mikey Keene has an average performance, I think there's going to be a lot of people out there saying, how much are we paying Bryce Underwood? What's the figure? What's the figure? And a lot of people are going to be saying, we need to play Bryce Underwood. That's what I talked about at the very beginning of this, is these guys are going to be under the ultimate microscope. What's going to happen in that situation at that point in time as well? And what if we get a Cade McNamara, J.J. McCarthy type of balance as well? And I think that is what we are going to get. I feel pretty confident that Mikey Keene is going to start the season for Michigan this year. I don't know if he's going to finish the season for the Wolverines, but what happens if you have that situation where you have maybe the more talented guy as the backup, but obviously the less experienced guy as the backup, but he kind of shows just these huge flashes of playmaking ability for Michigan in those type of situations. And if Mikey Keene isn't playing as well, there might be a time where Sharon Moore is maybe forced to make a decision. I think there's a lot of comps to the McNamara and McCarthy situation. I think you have a proven veteran starter, but you have a younger guy that I think is better talent-wise. When Jim Harbaugh was the coach in 2021, they rode with the experience throughout all of this. I'm not sure if that's going to be the same. I'm not sure if that's going to be the end result in all of this. I kind of go back to the schedule. After those first 4 games, after that road game against Nebraska, Michigan has a bye week, and they have a home game against Wisconsin. If there is an opportunity, if there is a great opportunity to really transition Bryce Underwood into a starting role after the first month of the season, maybe he's got some spots in there where he has played a little bit as well, and he's got a little bit of experience in a football game against college defenses, and he's kind of learning the playbook, and he's starting to get a little bit more comfortable with it as we get into October a little bit. They got a bye week and then a home game against Wisconsin. That is about as good of a transition, I think, as you could ask for right now if you're Michigan, possibly going over to Bryce Underwood as well. Sharon Moore has proven. Now, last year, I think it's apples and oranges a little bit, last year's quarterback situation with this year's quarterback situation. But Sharon Moore proved when Davis Warren threw multiple picks and he turned the football over, there was precedent that he was able to make the change. He's going to have a lot of pressure from a lot of people to play Bryce Underwood this season. Before we get the chance to see Bryce Underwood play, or maybe Husan Longstreet play, or whoever is going to play to start the 2025 regular season, we're going to get to this period of spring practice. And usually at the end of spring practice, we have spring games. But I think those are in a little bit of jeopardy. There was an interesting soundbite a handful of days ago at a press conference from Matt Rhule, and I kind of heard what he had to say. And I could see other Big Ten teams and other teams around the country possibly following suit, and spring games might be in a little bit of jeopardy. I'm going to have Matt Rhule explain it, and then I'll follow up on it.
But I'll be honest with you, I highly doubt it. And I think it's really fundamentally, I hate to say it like this, it's really because, last year we're one of the more televised. We were one of the more televised spring games, and I dealt with a lot of people offering our players a lot of opportunities after that. So to go out and bring in a bunch of new players and then showcase them for all the other schools to watch, that doesn't make a lot of sense to me. The word tampering doesn't exist anymore. It's just absolute free, open, common market, and so I don't necessarily want to open up to the outside world. I don't want these guys all being able to watch our guys and say, "Wow, he looks like a pretty good player. Let's go get him." So,
why would you want to put your players on display in that type of situation? When you kind of look at the return, what's the benefit coming back to you? And that's what all of this, I think, spring game argument and spring game discussion, it's not really an argument, I think that kind of comes up. What's the benefit of a spring game? Like, historically, spring games are a show for the fans. It's kind of there to give them a little bit of a preview, get fans in the stands, get your players into a game-like situation, and just have a fun time to celebrate the season, the end of spring practice. This is the last time we're going to all kind of get together before we kind of start fall camp. In the past, it was an opportunity for exposure. It was an opportunity for fans to get in the stands, like I just said. Now the trade-off, now it's getting a little bit more serious. If you have a young player that you really like, if you have someone that maybe we might not know about or other schools were a little bit uncertain if they wanted to go after him in the winter transfer portal period, you put him on a free stage. You put him on an absolutely free stage out there, free display, put him on a pedestal, because like Matt Rhule said, there is absolutely no guidance. Tampering, everybody throws around the term tampering, but there's no such thing as tampering because there's no rules to enforce tampering. Ryan Day kind of talked about that before. The biggest problem within college football is enforcement, because tampering isn't really tampering if there's no rules to enforce tampering. If one guy goes out there and has a spectacular performance in a spring game, chances are that he has showed that throughout the last month, the 15 or so practices that these teams had put out in a spring atmosphere. Right? So one performance in a spring game isn't all of a sudden going to vault a guy from the second team to the first team. It's going to be a progression to get there. It's going to be about stacking days. It's going to be about stacking reps. It's going to be about what these coaches have evaluated in the spring practice more than just the spring game. The spring game is a lot for us fans to say, look at that guy over there. Hey, I didn't know that he was going to be playing with this group of guys. It kind of gives us a little bit of a future picture. But for coaches, they know how they want to structure things. And a performance in the spring game isn't all of a sudden, it's going to be just another day to evaluate. It's going to be another set of reps to evaluate. Right now, there's more risk than there is reward for a spring game out there. And I agree with Matt Rhule in all of this. I'm not ultra confident. Everybody says this summer we're going to get the structure, we're going to have this settlement, we're going to have all of this. I'm not sure if by the time next season starts that we're all of a sudden going to have this great structure where tampering all of a sudden isn't going to be as big of an issue anymore. Just one hocus pocus move one summer and all is done. Maybe there's some people working more behind the scenes that I anticipate certainly right now, but you kind of see it little by little. Parts of college football being chipped away and chipped away and chipped away. I hope I'm wrong. I hope by this summer we can figure this thing out. Because and the thing about figuring it out, and a lot of people, I've brought up some other calendar kind of focused subjects, and a lot of people are so focused, still focused maybe is the better way to put it, on the academic calendar and student athletes as a whole. Like, that's how we got into this situation. By having the false illusion that these people are truly student athletes. These are professionals now. And, and like that's the crossover that we have with like the playoff and the bowl games. Like there are still people in the room within college football that want to preserve a past era of college football when it's dead. It is dead as a doornail. We know what we need. You know what we need. I know what we need. We need contracts. Look at the Xavier Lucas, Wisconsin and Miami situation. Like, anybody could change schools at any given time. Like, I don't know. You kind of look around this thing, and I'm like, man, this needs to be figured out. Otherwise, you cannot blame a guy like Matt Rhule in doing what he's doing right now at the University of Nebraska. Lot to cover today, but thanks everybody for coming along for the ride on Big Nation here today on this Wednesday. So until next time, I'm Big Ten Ted. We will see you in the next one.
Thank you for watching and listening to Big Nation. Make sure to subscribe and follow Big Ten Ted on X, YouTube, and podcast platforms to stay in the know on all things Big Ten football.